Welcome to all our listeners to this very happy occasion when we are in the presence of Ajahn Bramavamso, the most respected Ajahn, who is also fondly known as Ajahn Brahm. And today it's a tremendous opportunity since Ajahn is with us in Sri Lanka. A very warm welcome. And it's much appreciated because I know Ajahn landed in the country last night around midnight.
Correct.
And within hours we are having this interview. So that's the compassion being shown to us, and it's a tremendous opportunity, Ajahn.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be able to give this opportunity.
May I start then with the first question?
Certainly.
Ajahn, as you know, Sri Lanka has had a lot of turmoil in the recent past over and above the pandemic.
Yes.
We had very severe shortages of food and fuel, crippling power cuts and all manner of issues. So this has led to a lot of instability and uncertainty about the future. And there is worry and anxiety and fear, especially among the young, about the future and those with young families. There appears to be a lot of migration out of the country. So under such circumstances, we would like Ajahn to please tell us what the Dhamma says about resilience and how Ajahn would advise on how to face such challenges, please.
Certainly. As you know, that I was born in London, UK, after the Second World War. And I still remember just walking in many parts of London and seeing this terrible devastation of that Second World War, which was still there. They used to call it the bomb sites. And still I remember from listening from my mother that much of the food which we ate and which I ate was rationed still. So even a country like UK had a lot of turmoil after the Second World War. But nevertheless, there was a positive attitude, especially by the leaders, to make sure that we didn't allow any negativity to overcome the beautiful positive attitudes that there was a country, there was lots of skilled workers, there was lots of harmony. So let's build up the country again. Every time I've seen places which were devastated, even like, in Germany after the Second World War, many cities were bombed to almost nothing. You see places just like Japan. Some of those cities had nuclear bombs. And if you ever go to Hiroshima or Nagasaki, it's a very moving experience, the suffering and devastation which they went through, but their willingness to build it all back together again. I mentioned Germany and Japan because those two economies became two of the strongest in the world. As far as the Dhamma is concerned, the future is up to us to build. It's not predetermined. And as long as we work together here in Sri Lanka, there's immense possibilities for a very happy, beautiful, prosperous, and also very Dhamma-filled society. Which is why not? I come from overseas, so whenever I come to Sri Lanka, it's an incredibly beautiful country. And it has so many wonderful places, like up here in Bandrawela. Just the views behind me are fantastic. So you have so much positive things going on in the country. Why focus on the negative? Yes. One of my old sayings is if you have a garden and you water the weeds grow and take over. If you water the flowers grow and take over. So please, people of Sri Lanka, water the flowers. Let the weeds get choked by the flowers.
Thank you. Thank you for that encouragement and the positivity, Bhante. There are some who seem to be ruminating and worrying over and overthinking And in such a state, the Dhamma, the Dhamma obviously needs a very rational mind and a not quite robust, but to some extent at least, stable mind. How would Bhante see those who are sort of almost getting depressed or anxious in that sort of state, how the Dhamma could help? Where I'm sure the Dhamma doesn't exclude them, but we'd like to hear from Bhante.
Of course, the Dhamma doesn't exclude anybody at all. And I'm sure we were just talking before, as a monk I have to be honest, that we were talking about people like Kisa Gotami, people like Patachara. Look, Patachara, she was one of those women in Buddhism which really inspires me. She lost her 2 children, her husband and her 2 parents on the same day. And she was left by herself alone, no other family. Now that should make someone very depressed. And for her, she went mad. And she walked into the Jeta Grove Monastery, the Jetavana, when the Buddha was giving a sermon. But because she was crazy, she walked in there naked, as a young woman without any clothes on at all. And most people said, "Get out of here." And the Buddha said, "No, come in." That idea of welcoming everybody is really important. No matter how they're dressed, no matter what they look like, no matter where they're from, please be welcoming. And Sri Lanka is a welcoming country. Don't think, oh, we don't know who we're letting into this country. No, give them a chance. I can only say some of the things which I've known from Australian society. We had a lot of Vietnamese migrants coming into Australia some years ago after the Vietnam War was finished. Many of them fled for their lives. And there was one gentleman who came on a boat, a good example of many others. And when he arrived in Australia, he came close enough to the shore, he could see safety. And he was really scared for his life and all of his family which were in that boat. And the first people he saw were 2 Australian fishermen. Now it's Aussie culture. As a Buddhist I don't agree with this, but still, the feeling behind it was amazing. They shouted out to this Vietnamese migrant, "Welcome to Australia, mate. Have a beer." And he always remembered that statement. And eventually, by working hard, starting from nothing, he became a very successful businessman and then was elected to be the governor of Southern Australia for 2 terms, from nothing to this position of quite a lot of authority and respect. And that's why he said people welcomed him and they trusted him. And this is what he wanted to give back. It's the same with Sri Lanka. Please have that welcoming attitude, and then it's amazing just how people will be able to give back to this country.
Bhante, we do have a large population who are of Buddhists who are wanting to tread the path and who are wanting to progress, and but nevertheless, when it comes to sometimes in meditation, oftentimes at the beginning and not only beginning, even later, they run into difficulties, and therefore they sort of stop or get disheartened. If we sort of take Anapanasati, for example,
Yes.
Could we have some practical advice, Bhante, tips on
Yes.
how to proceed?
Certainly. Well, the camera's behind. I can look at some of the trees and the bushes behind me, and you'll see the leaves on those trees and bushes are still when the wind doesn't blow. You don't have to hold them still. Protect them from the wind, and they become still all by themselves. That's their nature. The same as the human mind. If you protect it from wanting, from craving, from desire, from ill will, from frustration, you protect it from those things, and the mind becomes still all by itself. Meditation is not something you do. It's something which happens when you stop doing things. Too many people forget the Dhamma about not controlling a mind which you don't own. It's one of the great sutras of the Buddha is his second sutta, the Anatta Sutta. And there he said that these 5 khandhas, you don't own any of them. So why do you think you can control them? You let them be. And when you let them go, they become still all by themselves. It's learning how to relax to the max.
Is that why, if I may ask, sometimes we hear that right effort is no effort?
Right effort is restraint. It is not allowing negative states of mind to actually remain in your mind. If you try to get rid of those negative states of mind, you're adding more negativity. One of the most beautiful ways is to just allow these states just to be, to know them, understand them. And just in the similes in the sutras of the Buddha and other monks and nuns overcoming Mara, they never overcame Mara through effort. They overcome Mara through wisdom. I know you, Mara. And then Mara had to leave. So wisdom defeated Mara.
Yes. When it comes to the study and practice of the Dhamma in living in Sri Lanka, there's a lot of study. I mean, every TV channel has almost all the day long. So we can hear the Dhamma. So that's plenty of it, which is good. However, how do we balance the two? Because it wouldn't be ideal to have intellectual pursuit, which one gets engulfed in and get to hinder the practice. So how does one balance the study and practice, Bhante?
It's good to do some study, to know the basic teachings of the Buddha. But there were some occasions which you will know about where a person came and listened from the mouth of the Buddha himself some teachings, and they'd be very simple teachings and very brief. And from those simple, brief teachings, the Buddha would say, off you go into the forest and meditate. You may know how to cook a curry by studying it, but you need to go and practice. Many times it will be wrong, to be inedible, but you keep on trying until you get the method correct. And that's where you can really test your understanding is accurate if you put it into practice and it starts to work. That's one of the great things with meditation. Yes, it's simple to understand what meditation is and how to meditate, but actually to be able to do it, people can know all the 16 stages of Anapanasati, but how many people can actually get into those jhanas? They think they know, but they don't. Another good example of that is where the Buddha said that if you know the Four Noble Truths, if you really know the Four Noble Truths, then you can put your hand up, you're an arahat. So we think we know, but there's always some stuff which we can't see, we don't see. And that's where the practice is necessary to test out your understanding.
Bhante, mindfulness is the key to a lot of things, to the Dhamma, to the practice. And mindfulness is being encouraged from the school levels now. So that's all very good. But I would like to hear from Bhante mindfulness and kindfulness, which Bhante coined the word. But I think we'd like to hear more about that, the connection or the difference.
Even mindfulness, you may think this is an extreme example, but even a drunken man is mindful enough to find his way home, even when he's been drinking a lot. I don't know how he does that, but he can manage to get back home. Mindfulness has many different levels and powers. That's why I also coined the word There's ordinary mindfulness, powerful mindfulness, and superpower mindfulness. Mindfulness has different intensities. And if you want to have the mindfulness which is going to be very useful in your life, then you do need that mindfulness which is free of the 5 hindrances. I don't know why people don't notice that and say more about that. To be free of the 5 hindrances, you do need your virtue, you do need your deep meditation, you do need all the other factors of the Eightfold Path, including right view and right intention. That's why time and time and time again, the Buddha would always say, the only way to success in these things is through the Eightfold Path, never a One-fold Path. Mindfulness is good, but it has to be supported by all these other conditions.
So the 8 have to support each other
Yes,
and grow together.
indeed. And especially, as you know, I often encourage, because it's not encouraged at all, the 8th one, samadhi. And please, everyone has heard this from me before, please don't call samadhi concentration. That is not actually a good English translation of that word. Stillness is a far more meaningful translation and far more accurate. When the mind is still, then it's on one thing. If you try and focus it on one thing through force, it will move.
So the practical tips or the prerequisites to getting that stillness, Bhante, how would you
Is
recommend?
right view, right intention, right speech, action, livelihood, right mind, right effort, and right mindfulness, and then the stillness comes. Each one of those is important. As the Buddha, this is a little gatha which I have to chant every time I do an ordination for bhikkhus and bhikkhunis. It's a silang paribharitang samadhi mahapola hoti mahani sangso. When your meditation is supported by your virtue, then it's a great benefit and a great power. People think that to get deep meditation you need lots of effort, lots of time, going to retreat centers like this. But the Buddha said you also need your virtuous practice as well. If that virtue is strong, your meditation will be strong.
Thank you, Bhante. That's an area in virtue, especially lying and cheating have become so rampant, so difficult to even differentiate between truth and lies. Sometimes people, so much of fake news that
Yes,
people have stopped listening to news actually.
indeed. Again, that's why our leaders, even like someone like myself, you have to be committed to truthfulness no matter what it costs you. Because otherwise, if our leaders, especially the senior monks, can't stand up to sincerity and truth, then who can? And our politicians as well. Being able to stand up for truthfulness, we should have much more amnesty in this world. One thing which really impressed me with Buddhism is the lack of punishment. If you make a mistake, acknowledge it, get forgiveness, and learn from it to become a better person in the future. So you're not afraid of making mistakes, but you're afraid of telling lies.
The second and the fourth precept
Yes,
are so important.
they are indeed. Well, all the
I mean,
precepts
all
are important.
5 are important.
Yes.
Right. Bhante, what advice would Bhante give to a person who has sickness and needs to meditate?
Well, this is a personal story because when I was, I think my first year as a monk in northeast Thailand, I got a terrible fever. It wasn't dengue. Well, actually, people didn't know what it was. It looked like it was typhoid, but they couldn't find any of the typhoid viruses. So they decided to give me just a cocktail of antibiotics. It was a very third world part of Thailand at the time, and the monks warned that basically we were supposed to be tough. So in the evening, at 6 o'clock, when the nurse on the station disappeared to go home, I was concerned there was no night nurse replacement. When I asked another monk about this, he said there never is a night nurse. If you get even more sick at night time, that's just unfortunate karma. So it was not a very, very pleasant experience. But after 4 or 5 weeks of fever, it was one day, I'd never been as weak as that in my whole life. Even now I'm old, but I never felt some lack of energy as after 4 or 5 weeks of a fever. It turned out actually to be scrub typhus, which wasn't supposed to be there, but because we were Westerners, the locals had their natural immunity, we never did. So anyway, that I was so tired and exhausted, one day I decided I'm just going to meditate anyway. And I meditated on the bed in hospital, and it wasn't in a posture you'll ever see in any book. You may have seen people in hospital, one arm this way, one arm that way, legs all over the place. But nevertheless, you could get into a really, really nice deep meditation. And that personal experience showed me that your body, being weak or being old or being very sick or having fever, it makes it more difficult, but it never makes it impossible. Because when you do your meditation, it's learning how to access the citta, the mind, not the body. You can bypass the body, and that's where all old age and sickness live. You go past that. Even very sick people, they can. Maybe they won't because they don't have enough confidence and skill, but it can be done.
If there was previous skill, possibly.
Yeah, you did, but how do you know what skill you had in the past? So just take it for granted, or maybe maybe I have had previous skill. So give it a try. Why not?
And the management of pain through meditation, as an effect of meditation.
Indeed. You may know how the Buddha taught. There's 2 types of pain. They call it like the mental arrow, the mental thorn, and the physical one. And the most important part of that is the mental reaction. The physical one is maybe 5%, 10% of the pain. How we react to it is the biggest problem. And even in the monastery where I grew up in Thailand, just a group of monks, we had a book there of how to give birth, women giving birth to babies. And people would often say, what's that doing there in a monk's monastery? And it was because a community in the United States had decided when somebody was going to give birth, let's just change just the whole attitude towards this. Never call it labor pains, call it labor energies. Just that much, not expecting to interpret this as a pain, but as an energy. That actually changed a lot of the experiences of the mothers-to-be giving birth. And we thought that was a wonderful example of Dhamma, of how we stop our expectations, our negative expectations, replace them with positive expectations. Like the question you started with, the future of Sri Lanka. If you have negative expectations, this is going to hurt, this is going to hurt, this is going to hurt, then it does hurt. But when you change it to a positive expectation, this can be done. It's not the first time that Sri Lanka or any country has suffered a lot of problems from politics or from nature, tsunamis or whatever. And wise people learn how to say, well, let's build it up together again. Let's make it happen again. Let's work together in harmony to make this a beautiful country. I always say you've got so much going for you in Sri Lanka. Who would want to leave?
Good to hear. Yes, of course.
Yeah,
Green all round, isn't it?
green all around, enough water.
One last question then. Is it compulsory to reach the states of absorption, or is a reasonable level of samadhi adequate to switch to vipassana?
Okay. You don't switch to vipassana. Insight is something which comes up naturally, together with stillness. This is a natural process. Never think that these stages of you disappearing from the world are something which you do. These are not attainments, these are letting goes, and it happens just automatically. If you have a very deep stage of meditation, it's almost impossible. I cannot imagine that anyone can actually say that they have to do something afterwards. You keep looking at these stages, and you can't forget them, and you are going to see. Can I give you a quick simile?
Yes, please.
Okay. It was a simile of the tadpole and the frog. A tadpole born in the water, lived all its life in the water, can never understand what water is, no more than a fish can. The difference between a tadpole and a fish is a tadpole one day grows to be a frog, and the frog one day jumps out of the water. Imagine that experience. The frog is now squatting on dry land. Now it has the opportunity to know what water is. And once it knows what water is, only when it's gone and disappeared, that's what water is. That's why in the deep meditations, things have vanished. In the deep meditations, one of the things which have vanished are your body and the five senses. How on earth can you really understand what the five senses are when you've been born in them, lived all your life in them? They've always been there for you. And now you get into the jhana, now they're gone for the first time in your life. That's going to change much of the way you look at things. That's where insight comes from.
It's within it.
It's within it, it's caused by it. Samadhi pachaya yata bhutiyana dasanang. Sama samadhi is always called by the Buddha the four jhanas. So the four jhanas are the cause for seeing things as they truly are.
Much merit, Bhante.
Yeah.
We started with fairly our turmoil.
Yeah.
We are ending with a very high level of tranquility.
Yes.
Thank you, Bhante. Much merit on
Yeah.
behalf of all of us who are the beneficiaries of listening to Bhante. And may Bhante have a happy, of course, Bhante is always happy and long life.
Yes.
And may all Bhante's spiritual aspirations be fulfilled.
Excellent. They're not my aspirations. And thank you for your very respectful questions.